Thank you so much, Judy. And welcome to everyone joining today's webinar. So talking about formatting visuals, I do have a brief agenda here just to show you. We're going to spend most of our time in the demo, but just to give you an idea of the things that we are going to be looking at. We're going to be talking about field names, summarization, page formatting, and then looking at these individual visuals, the graphs, the charts, tables, the slicers, which is Power BI's verbiage for filters, and then overall themes for your reports. I know a lot of times, I myself, I love formatting. I could spend all day doing formatting, but for most people creating reports, formatting can be finicky and time consuming, and there's a lot of little details to it and a lot of things that you can customize in Power BI. So it definitely can be something that is overwhelming and often overlooked by report creators. But it's definitely something that can help take your reports from, I've got my data and it works, to very professional, aesthetically pleasing. It just takes it to that next level. So let's go ahead. I'm going to end the show here so we can take a look at Power BI. So I just have an example report up here, and we're going to take a look at the different customizations that we can do from a formatting perspective. So the first thing that we're going to look at is talking about the fields and how they are summarized. So when I look at this chart here, I can see I have vendor names running on the y-axis here, and then I have the document amount running on the x-axis. Now, when you are connecting to data within Power BI, a lot of times the field names are going to be in their schema names versus something that maybe an end user would want to see, or just verbiage that your company uses. So when you select a visual, and go here, and then this is what I call the visual pane, and we're looking specifically at the fields. We've pulled vendor name is what we're using on the axis, and the values is that document amount. Well, if we want this to say something different, so for example, say I'm going to go and hit the down arrow next to document amount, and I'm going to rename it just for this visual, and I'm going to say total value. And I'm just going to hit enter, and we can see that now that visual name has changed here on this particular chart. You can rename fields off on the right hand side here, and you can even rename them within your query. Why it would be beneficial to rename them on a visual is the ability to look back and see exactly where that data point is coming from. So for example, a lot of customers I work with connect to GP tables. If I want to know the column name that came from, I want to keep that column name the same here on the fields, but it's not what I want to display on the report itself. So I will change the name here within this field area on the visual pane. We also can see that the data points here, they are summarizing. It's giving me a sum of all the document amounts by vendor. You can change this. Say you wanted to have a visual that shows you the average amount that you spend with that vendor. In the same place, if we select the drop-down arrow, we see the default is to summarize. Well, if I wanted to look, show me the average. Now, the lines didn't change too much, but the amounts down here definitely did. Now here for Caterpillar, if I hover over it, oops, I accidentally clicked on it. It's taking a moment to pop up, but it's just over 200,000. When I have it summarized, we're in the millions here. So you can see that it is changing that. So there's options for averages, minimum, maximums. You can do counts and variance. There's a lot of different options. So if you wanted to have the same type of fields used, but you want one chart that summarizes, one chart that is an average, or even if you wanted to, say, use this same document amount twice, and you want one that summarizes and one that averages, Now you can see we have this one summarizing, this one is showing us the average. So you can change those summarizations and then you can have multiple fields on your visual. Another thing that you can do with changing the summarization is instead of a value, it can be a percent of total. So when we look over here at these year-to-date purchases, let me make this a little bigger, we're seeing 1.52 million, but maybe I want that document amount just to show me we spend 50% of our spendings with this vendor. If I go down to show value as and percent of grand total, now instead of amounts, it's showing me Caterpillar is 23.16% of our year-to-date purchases. So you have a few different options for how you can display the data and change it here on this field visualization pane. So now we're going to step away from just visuals directly, and we're going to talk about overall page formatting. All of your formatting options are available under this paint roller icon that you see on the visualization tab. Right now, I don't have any visuals selected, so I'm going to hit the paint roller tab. And here are my options for page formatting. And we're just going to look at a couple. This page background and wallpaper, they are very similar. The wallpaper will format everything, including what is underneath this dotted line. And this dotted line is signifying what is outside of your report canvas. So when you're viewing the report on like Power BI Online, you can't pull any visuals past that line. That's just kind of the end of the report. So when I'm doing formatting, I use page background if I'm going to apply something to the whole page. The couple things that you can do with the page background is you can give it a color. So if I wanted the whole background to be blue, the transparency automatically defaults to 100%. So I could just take it down and we'll start to see the transparency. So I could give the background all one color. It can help if you want to set visuals off to have a background color. Another thing that you can do is you can add an image or a photo to the background. So a lot of times when I'm creating reports, you will see that I put our logo here in the upper left-hand corner, or if I'm working with a customer, the customer's logo. But let's say you wanted it more like a watermark on the back of your reports. You can add an image, and I've got the logo saved right here, and it automatically defaults to that 100% transparency. So you could pull it down to whatever transparency you want. Now you will notice that we can't quite see it. It's blocked by some of these visuals. Well, as we work on some of our formatting, we're going to make this visible. So just hang with me for a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to change the backgrounds on these visuals so we can see through them. So from a page formatting perspective, those are a couple of options that you have. Primarily, most of the formatting is done at the visual level. And depending on the visuals you have, you can have slightly different formatting available. We're going to first look at these graphs and charts and a lot of the formatting that is available for them. So I'm going to go to the paint roller icon here, and we're just going to kind of walk through these. So when you look at the general tab, the thing to note here, this X and Y position, that is where the visual is on the field. So if you think of this whole bottom as your overall X position and this whole vertical line would be your Y position. But what people do use this for is with the width and height. If you want all your visuals to be the exact same width and height, it is worth it to come in here and set, so it's 587. Well, maybe we want everything to be 590 and 370. We can come in here and we can do that. And then we could go over to this one and we say, we want this one to also be 590 and 370. And this one I've run into a problem because it's red outline here. It's just telling me it can't default to that. So you can set width and height. You can change any visual just by dragging it. And as you can see, red lines appearing, this is helping me to line it up with the visual below or the visuals next to it. But sometimes if you're creating a lot of visuals, you may want to put those exact width and heights. There are some parameters to what it will allow different visuals to be size-wise, so it isn't always something you can do, but it's there if you need it. At the axis level, you can change a ton of things. So we're going to look at the y-axis first. If we want to place it on the right-hand side, we could do that. I don't do that a lot, but if you had one, you definitely could. You can change the color of the axis itself. You can change the text size. You can change the font family. These sliders that we have, the minimum category width, so this is how thick your rows are going to be. So as you can see, the larger I bring it, the less that can appear on that visual because those rows are getting thicker themselves. Maximum size, this is how much the name here, this title area, how much this axis is going to take up in overall percentage to your visual. So if you have long names here, definitely can expand that maximum size. Inner padding, this gives you space between the bars here. So you can see that's a little thinner line now. If I give it a little more padding, it'll be even thinner. Just defines the space you want between your bars. And with this axis, you can also format the title. See where it says vendor name, you could just show the title, have a different color. You could give it a different title name if you want to, and the size. A lot of times with reports, if I have an overall title on the report name like this, says top 10 utilized vendors, and these are vendor names, I know they're vendors. So I just switch the slider bar to off to save some space on my visual. If at any time you've made a lot of changes and you don't like them, you can select revert to default and it will go back to the default settings for the report type you have here. So I'm going to turn that off again. With the x-axis, you can do the same things as far as color and text size. You can also define a start and stop. So if you didn't want it to start at 0, maybe you wanted it to start at 10,000 because maybe your lines are too long, you can't really see a lot of difference, you want to look at a closer snapshot, you can define start and end points. With the display units, this is something I frequently change on reports. A lot of times it will default to auto. So you will see 1.5 million, or it would be 1K if you're dealing in the thousands, things like that. You also see that on just card visuals like the one up here. So a lot of times when I come into display units, I am changing it to none so I can see the full amount. And then if you have a value that has decimal points, you can also set to have 0 decimal points on your axis. So with this, I'm going to change the title of that as well. And you can have grid lines on and off, so you don't necessarily have to see those grid lines if you don't want. When we look at the zoom slider, if we turn that on, it really is just something that allows you to zoom into your chart if you would need that. I don't see this used a lot on visuals. A lot of time a zoom slider might be used on a map visual versus just a chart. But if you have a lot of data and things are starting to get squished, maybe you would want a zoom slider. Data colors. So you're going to have a default color based on the theme of your report, and we'll look at themes in a moment, but you also can change that default color. You can select from the theme colors that are available, or if you go into more colors, you can select from a much larger option set, or you can enter one of those hexa or the RGB colors if you know what they are. There also is a formula option. So if I hit this little formula, it's going to give me a chance to set colors based on either a color scale, rules, or a field value. So if I did a color scale based on that document amount, I'm just going to pull that up here. And I can give a lowest value, or we can enter custom for minimum and maximum. But if I select OK, now we can see the color changing based on the value of that document amount. With rules, you also can say, you know, anything that's in the top 10% of values, I want that green. Or you can even give it a specific number, anything over 1 million, I want that green. So you can do some formula for the data colors. Data labels, you can turn those on and then they will appear here. Otherwise, they usually appear when you are hovering over a data point. And then you can also format, color, the units, the position of data labels. You can do that as well, and their size. The plot area. So this is when we are talking about the graph or chart area. It has a transparency of 0, so you can turn that up. This is not the background yet. We're going to get there. What you can do with the plot area is, instead of having a watermark on the back of your page, you could have a watermark specifically on a visual. So I'm going to add an image here. And I've got just an example. And I had it at the 100% transparency, but now if I start bringing it down, let's put it at about 54, still kind of large, 74%. You can see that this is quite large. The image fit is at normal. So if I select to fit, it fits it more to the image itself. I don't see this used a ton, but if you did have some type of watermark you might want to put on individual visuals, definitely is something you can do. Titles. When you are creating reports, Power BI starts to create a title based on the fields you're picking. So this might say document amount by vendor, by whatever. You can come in here and you can type your own title text. You can define a font color. When you do a background color like I have here, you can see that it creates like a title bar at the top. You can change alignment and font size as well. Background, this is where we're going to start exposing what we put on our page. The background is defaulted here to white with a 0% transparency. Well, if I want to see through what's behind, I'm just going to turn it up to 100% transparency, and you can see that that is starting to show up what we've put on the back there. Lock aspect, we're not going to look too much into that, but if you turn that on, it's going to keep your proportions so that if you resize this, your proportions stay the same. You can apply a border. You can change the color of the border. You can also do a formula anywhere where it has this FX. You can do one of those formulas and give it a radius to curve the border. So here we've got a slight border on this one now. It's not a very thick line. I could always go in here and say, let's give that border, instead of 19, let's pull it back there. So it's not a huge border, but you can put a border on that if you want. Shadow, this really does just give more of that 3D effect to it, and you can give colors to your shadow. So if we want to say use that same, and you can define where you want it to be. So if we want it to be on the bottom left, so now we have a shadow behind our visual here. Can really help with that 3D effect if you really want it to pop off a page. Tooltips. What this allows you to do is give more data in the bubbles that appear when you hover over a data point. So if I turn this on, I need to do a couple things. So I have the tooltip turned on, and now on this pane, there's a little tooltips box here to add data fields. So let's say I want to also see how many documents. I'm going to go, instead of first document number, I'm going to do a count of the document number. And when I hover over a data point now, we can see vendor name, total value, and count of document number. I do this a lot with map visuals when I want to see more information than just the customer name and total sales. Maybe I want to see their address or their sales territory or something like that. And see if I take this off on the tooltip, when I hover over here, it's just that vendor name and total value. The defaults to the pop-up box are those fields that are feeding your report. So if it's something that may not be on either axis, tooltips will help. Visual header, we don't see this with these types of visuals, but over here on this little card visual that I have, if I turn off the visual header, you'll see that, oops, sorry, it's category label now, and I'm so sorry about that. We're going to go to the slicer. It's on the slicer one. If I turn off the visual header, well, none of it is turning off. I apologize for that. We're just going to keep going. Normally the visual header, it will turn off what automatically appears based on your category. So let's just keep going because there's so much to look at. One thing of note with this donut chart, you can format the vendor, this vendor name legend here. So if I expand the legend, I can determine where it's going to appear. If we want it on the top, left, center, so we can put it in different areas. We can give it a name. And we can change the color for that and font for the legend text. Okay, so let's look, talk about this card visual that we have for a moment. When we had talked about the rules, the way we created rules here for the color scale, you can do that with just background as well. So what I've seen this used for is with card visuals like this, we're looking at overall current balance. And if we expand the background, maybe we want to do a formula on this, and we want to say, based on the sum of the current balance, if it's greater than let's say 400,000, and it's less than 100,000, or well, let's do 100 million to make sure we get as many as we want in here. We want the background to be blue. And you could add a new rule. So you could do this to define KPIs. You could say, okay, it's green if we've met our goal, it's yellow if we're not quite there, it's red if we're really low. You can have multiple rules here. But we're just gonna get rid of that. We have one. You select okay. So because we are greater than that 400,000 but less than the 100 million, our background is blue. So again, I've seen this a lot of times with sales reports, KPIs, things like that. You can give that formula to a background to call your attention to where you may be at in the scheme of your key performance indicators. Okay. One other thing with this card visual, we had mentioned about this label here. It is the category label. If you turn that off, it will get rid of where it says current balance here. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at a couple things that are different to just call attention to, as I know we're getting close to the end of our time here with table and matrix visuals. So you have a lot of the same things as far as the grid and style that you do with tables in Excel. So if we look at style, this is a default table. We look minimal. Here's a different way for the table to look, bold, header. You can look through some of the different styles that they have already available. You can turn on, if you want to see the vertical grid lines, you could give them different colors. You could turn on a horizontal grid, and you could do the same thing. I'll leave it gray here. You can have outlines, weights of the outline, text size. For column headers, you can change the font, the background color, you can give an outline. One thing of note, auto sizing the column width. So if your column width, if all of a sudden you have a longer name, the columns will automatically size. Otherwise, you can turn that off and then you can set the size and it will always stay that way. Alignments. We're not going to get too into it, but with URL icons, you can set up fields within Power BI to be URLs, and then it can have an icon instead of the long URL, so you could click on it and link to the URL behind it. With row headers, you have some of the same color, background color. For the step layout, you can determine the padding for how far indented you want steps to be within a matrix. Values, you have the same thing. You can give font colors and background colors, outlines, text size. One thing of note to call out with subtotals, not only can you format them, but you see we have a subtotal here at the customer or the vendor level, and then at each of the status levels and the individual POs in this. If we have this per row level turned on, we see all of them have it. Maybe we don't want to summarize at the PO number. So we can see now we no longer have subtotals here in these lines. Maybe we don't want a subtotal at status. Now we no longer have that subtotal here at the vendor name. So you can turn on and turn off which levels you would want to subtotal. The grand total you can also format as well, font, size. Field formatting and conditional formatting. The field formatting is you can format each individual column. You just select which column you want it to be, due date, subtotal, remaining, and you can give it different backgrounds, fonts, whatever you would want. But if you want something all the way across, you would have to do it for each individual column. Conditional formatting is similar, but you can apply those rules like we looked at up here with the color scale or just a set of rules like a value amount. You can say, you know, I want to take this remaining column, I want to format it. You can do background color, font color, data bars, you can add icons or a URL. So if you want to calculate something and say, I want the remaining to turn red if my subtotal was less than 10,000, you could create that rule. The rule as to what you are summarizing or what you are looking at does not have to exist on the table to be used in conditional formatting. But that is a little more complex, so we would get into that in a separate session. But just know that you can do that, and if you wanted the whole row to turn red, you would have to format each individual column as well. Okay, thank you for hanging in with me. I just got two more things I want us to cover. Talking about slicers, which are these filters up here. With anything that is a list like this vendor class one, on the general tab, you can change it from vertical to horizontal to change it to look like buttons. I don't recommend it with long lists like this is, but if you have a yes or no filter or like open or closed, having buttons sometimes is a little more aesthetically pleasing. So that's just changing the orientation between vertical and horizontal. For selection controls, you can determine if it's only going to be a single select. You can never have multiple selection. Or if you can multi-select with control, if you turn that off, you can select multiple ones without any worries whatsoever. Or if you want to select all option. A lot of times I don't use a select all option because if the filter is cleared, all are selected. So we see this is all our data here. And if I select a few, you know, it's filtered that data, but if I clear out my slicer again, I'm back to all data. So I don't use the select all a lot. The slicer header, if you turn that off, you see how vendor class went away. I don't recommend doing that because this little eraser to clear all your selections disappears if the slicer header goes away. Another thing I want to talk about with dates, because there's a few more options with dates. So when we're looking at this, with this drop-down arrow, these are all the different types of lists or types of formatting that you can have for your filter. So if I change it to drop-down, now it's a drop-down box, takes up less real estate, and that can happen on this vendor class one as well. But with dates, you also can have between. I want to be able to select a start and stop date. There is a slider bar, which when doing single dates, we don't like to use the slider bar a lot, or at least I haven't found people that do. So if you don't want the slider bar, one of the formatting options is just to turn the slider off. If you have it on, you also can change the color from a formatting perspective. With dates, you can do between, you can have a before and an after. And another kind of neat thing about dates is you can have relative date and relative time. So when I select relative date, I can say, I want to choose last, next, or this. So I can look at the last and I can determine, maybe the last 7 days or weeks. And it has both calendar or just regular weeks, months or calendar, and years or calendar. So if dealing here, I want to see the last 6 months. Well, we're not 6 months into this year. If I select 6 months, this will give me a rolling 6 months. If I select calendar, it would show just the last, not quite 4 months, since we're in the 4th month. So that's the difference with relative date filtering. Okay, themes. Last thing I want to cover here today. Normally, when you go into Power BI, it defaults to the Home tab here, and you can see a lot of things have popped up. We've got this blue has been the number one, the first color that pops up for us, and that is determined by your theme. So if you go to the View tab on your desktop, here are some common themes. And if I hit the down arrow here, it's showing me this is the current theme I have, and I can select from different Power BI themes that are already in here. The one I want to call attention to is the second row here, colorblind safe. And if I select that, the colors are going to change. These are the default colors and settings, font, things like that for that theme. You can see that it still did keep that I have a border and a shadow, but it changed those colors into one of those colorblind safe theme colors. You can also, from here, you can browse for themes, which that's if you have other company themes you've created. The theme gallery will take you to the Power BI community where members have uploaded themes they've created. You can customize your current theme and then save your current theme or create a theme from scratch. If you customize a current theme, within here, you can select those theme colors. And again, you can use Hexa colors and RGB. So if you want to get super fancy and use like some of your company colors, you could set a theme with company colors. It can be beneficial to set a theme if you're going to be using it to create a lot of reports and you don't want to have to take the time to format every visual and every report. Another thing that you can do, I'm going to go ahead and get out of this, we'll cancel this theme, is you can copy over formatting. So here I've got some formatting that I've put onto this one. I'm going to select this format painter, then I'm going to use my paintbrush to swipe it over here, and we can see that it has applied those same formatting rules and things on this visual. It does it only one at a time. So if I had another visual I wanted to copy it over to, I'd have to select Format Painter and copy it over again. But those are a couple ways to save some time when you are creating that formatting. It is worth it to create a theme, or at the very least to understand that Format Painter. I always recommend spending some time to come up with an overall aesthetic for reports you want. It really does just take your reports to that next level. I know I went a little bit over our half hour here, but does anyone have any questions? Wonderful. Well, if you think of anything, here, I'll just put this up. If you have any questions that come up afterwards, or you want to talk Power BI about anything else, feel free to reach out to me, or you can connect with IS. We do a lot more than just Power BI, so definitely check us out online or reach out to us to connect for any of your questions. Thank you so much for spending a bit of time with me today, and have a great rest of your day.